Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this local review body of November the 12th. My name is Councillor Henry Anderson. I'm convener of the local review body. On my left is Councillor Wilson. On my right is Councillor Waters. On the far right is Mr Harrison, Planning Advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department, has had no previous involvement in any of the applications we have before us today. On the left of Councillor Wilson is our legal advisor, Mr Colin Elliott. On the far left is Mr Williams from Committee Services. Before we commence the business of the day, can I inform you that all today's meeting will be recorded and will be available on the Council's website. The House rules are that all electronic devices either be switched off or in silent mode. There's no fire drills scheduled for today, so if the alarm goes, please make your way to the nearest fire exit and out of the building. Before we go into the business, can I first ask if there's any declarations of interests?
No. No.
Thank you. The minutes of the local review body from November, I can't remember, but from November anyway. Is there any? 17th of September. Are we quite happy to agree to the minutes?
They would be noted to me.
Noted, sorry.
Actually, there's a
yeah.
discrepancy in the dates there.
I think there
Yeah,
is
the dates from
discrepancy. That's why I didn't say September.
Sorry,
I did
Chair.
one in November.
Yeah, the agenda says 17th September, whereas the actual minute is it's 15th October. So it should
15th
be.
October.
If you're content with them, you would note the content of the 15th of October.
Thank you. 15th of October, just for clarity.
Okay.
Happy to know.
Happy to know.
Happy with that?
Agreed.
Right, thank you. Now, we've gone through that. We'll go on to the business of today, and the first one is 4.1, which is the erection of a conservatory at Ivy Bank Guest House, Boat Brae, Blairgowrie. Is there any representations for that application? No. I'll ask Mr Harrison then to go into the details of this.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm people can hear what I'm saying? Thank you. Just prior to introducing that particular individual item, it might seem prudent to make a general comment about the cases that are coming before you today, Chair, if I may, just to draw to your attention. In general, the cases have been assessed in relation to the provisions of the current local development plan, that's LDP 1, and at that time, LDP 2 was recognised as a material planning consideration, albeit being given, as you might say, limited weight in the decision-making process. The examination report on LDP 2 has, of course, been issued, and the full council, I understand, has approved this, and the finalised version for adoption been submitted to the Scottish Government. So really just to, as it were, to bring you slightly up to date in your considerations today, the provisions of LDP2 are now obviously a stronger material consideration before you than might have been the case at the time of the officer dealing with the applications themselves. You might also wish to note that many of the policies in LDP2 have effectively been carried forward from LDP1. So moving on from that to the application, our first item, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a conservatory extension at Ivybank Guesthouse, Boat Brae, Rattray by Blairgowrie. The conservatory would extend out from the secondary extension to this building. It would project to be almost in line with the front elevation of the main part of the guest house. It would have UPVC framing with a shallow pitched roof form set on the base course up to sill level. The base course level is proposed to be finished in a smooth render. The property is a traditional stone and slate design. It is not a listed building and lies out with but adjacent to Blairgowrie Conservation Area. And you might like to have page 23 onwards, which provides you the location plan and the site plan, and drawings of the actual proposed extension. The photographs I'll take you through, first of all, start with a view from the public road, then the building frontage and conservatory location, and then other garden ground and the adjoining development. So this is us effectively standing at the junction to the social housing, which you'll see later on Boat Brae. The conservation area is on, as it were, the left-hand side of the photograph there. And then we have Ivy Bank seen in its own grounds on the right-hand side of the photograph. So, as it were, going up and opposite the entry to Ivy Bank, this is on, as it were, the conservation area side of the road looking into the property, which, as you can see, has its, shall we say, shared parking immediately after going into the access. And this is the main frontage and that gable onto the public road of the property. So, as it were, going into the site now, there's an indication of the principal frontage of the guest house. Moving on from that, we go where we can, as it were, come round the corner of the main frontage and see the position of the proposed extension and, as it were, the secondary element of the guest house in terms of that element that's set back from the principal frontage. Beyond that, of course, you can see the garage. So, just to give you a front elevation where the extension would sit, this, of course, involves forming an entry through from the existing bedroom through the windows you see enclosed within the yellow lines there. Going slightly to the right of that, we now look back to the approximate position of the extension and its form relative to the main part of the site, the building, and of course this secondary wing. Moving from that position, as it were, down the side of the secondary wing, we now look straight onto that gable, and then stepping back again from that, we're now looking at the gable of that secondary wing. The approximate position of the conservatory shown in yellow there. Going slightly to the left of that, back round to the front as it were, we get a detail of the window which would be being removed in the process. And I mention this because there's obviously reference to the render being used, and the mullion in that instance is a rendered mullion. Moving to the left of that photograph, we go back to the frontage again, just to show you the detail of some of the existing windows. There's reference to the use of UPVC in the building, which you can see here. And then moving on, just to give you a little bit more of a context, this is the social housing referred to in the papers, which is beyond the garden ground at that lower level in relation to the guest house. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the guest house is a local business which, since being taken over in 2016, has been upgraded and transformed to provide luxury, award-winning accommodation. This enterprise also indirectly supports other local businesses in addition to providing the applicants with employment. The Victorian-style extension would serve the owner's bedroom as an enlargement of their very limited accommodation to provide additional living space. The extension would be on the principal elevation, but set some distance from the public street, partially screened by trees and set back from the main element of the guest house. This elevation faces towards the adjoining modern social housing and not towards Boat Brae. As such, it is not accepted that the proposal affects residential amenity. Similarly, it would be separated from the nearest listed building, Ectric Lodge, and the conservation area by some distance and intervening screening. It would not affect the setting of either the listed building or the conservation area. These aspects are recognised in the officer's report of handling. Regarding policies PM1A and RD1 Part C, the proposal is seen as making a positive contribution to the Victorian building and the locality, notably in comparison to the neighbouring social housing. regarding policy PM1B Part C, the materials, finishes and colours are seen as complementing the building, which already have 27 UPVC windows. The smooth rendered base level would match the adjoining stonework. It is noted that the building has existing rendered mullions and sills. The officer's view that the projecting bay would be unsympathetic is seen as a matter of personal opinion. Also, the officer's suggestions that to relocate the extension to the southeast elevation next to the high retaining wall, to use matching stonework on the base level and to extend the windows to floor level are all seen as unworkable due to the lack of daylight, the impossibility of securing matching stone and privacy concerns respectively. While Councillor Shears has taken up the invitation to visit the site and seen the internal layout, the officer has only visited the site externally and without identifying his presence. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, Ivybank Guest House is a traditional property located opposite the Blair Gowrie Conservation Area. As an addition to the applicant's living accommodation, the proposed extension would project from the principal elevation of the two-storey wing with corbelled gables. This elevation is orientated away from the public road, and the wing is set back and is partially screened by trees. The report refers to some inconsistency between the site and floor plans regarding the degree of setback. Excuse me. Notwithstanding the presence of modern development in the locality, the detailed design is seen as being out of keeping with the traditional building. The upper part of the conservatory has 12 windows with top opening hoppers. The lower part would have a substantial 2-metre high base finished in smooth render. The form of the conservatory proposed is of a standardised projecting bay design. These features are seen as incongruous due to the position of the proposed conservatory on the principal elevation of the host building, which is of a traditional stone and slate architecture. It is accepted that the extension would not affect the setting of the nearest listed building or the neighbouring conservation area. In this case, there are no representations. However, there is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Is there any questions, members, for officers on this matter?
Yes, Convener. Just trying to get to grips with the orientation. When in your submission there, you said the principal elevation. That's the street side elevation. You mean by the principal elevation, where this is on what I think officers term as the front elevation, which is actually coming off at right angles or perpendicular to the street. Is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, normally the principal elevation of a house or a building would be the one facing onto the public street. That's what you'd probably expect by the terminology. What I think the officer is saying here is that in this particular instance, it is the principal elevation in the sense it's the main frontage of the building, but as you rightly indicate, that frontage in this instance happens to be set effectively at right angles to the public street. And in that sense, it is the principal elevation, especially in the sense that it is effectively a gabled building, and the rear elevation of the building is set into the, shall we say, the retaining wall or the substantial difference in levels on that side, more northerly side of the building, or shall we say the north easterly side of the building. So in that sense, the elevation facing in the southwesterly direction is the principal elevation, albeit it's set at right angles to the public road.
Right, thank you. In relation to the drawings, there's a bit of a discrepancy has been pointed out on how far the orangery or the conservatory will protrude out. Given that we take it at the maximum that's shown in the detailed drawings that's coming out, will that create restrictions for the use of the garage in future?
Right. Well, first of all, maybe just to deal with what I understand to be the discrepancy, just for clarity. If we look at the, shall we say, page 32, which is the back page, the extent to which the projection of the extension comes seems to differ slightly from both page 23, but also, and more importantly, the more detailed plan on page 25. If you're in any doubt, or if there was any doubt, the page 25, which has actual dimensions on it, would be the one that would, shall we say, be taken as the important one. Was there a second part to your question that I've maybe not fully answered?
It was relation to the garage that.
Oh yes, of course.
If it is coming more, how would would it inhibit the access to and from the garage?
I think it obviously would, should we say, limit the means of access to the garage. But I think if you look at page 23, it would be, should we say, physically possible for a car to get past the conservatory, albeit it would be more restricted in terms of being able to turn and come out. But it may be a question that the applicant would have to reverse into the garage rather than going in front ways and then turning. So I don't think it would actually prevent the garage from being used.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, do you have some questions?
Thanks, Convener. Just to follow on from Councillor Waters' question, I'm on page 23, Mr Harrison, and I think the road is where, the public road is where it says adjacent road, exactly. And access is as indicated, so that you enter and there's if you call it a front elevation, just beside the end of the wee stick thing that says 0.50 metres. But the principal elevation, you call it that, is round the corner from that, going towards the blue.
That's right. The principal elevation is facing in that south-westerly direction.
From the road view is to a degree limited because of trees and various other things. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, if it helps, I'll take you back to that photograph.
Of that, yeah.
Does that help you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going on now to the detail of the plans, because, and I'm on page 24 and 25, and there was reference in your remarks to the underbuilding for the conservatory, because it clearly indicates on page 24 where the floor level is and also where the ground level is. And factually there's a substantial amount of underbuilding for this proposal. Is there any way that could be landscaped or dealt with to soften that underbuilding, in your opinion, given the point that I think Councillor Waters made about the access to the garage?
Excuse me. If you're thinking in terms of a planning condition, I think you're almost getting into the area of, should we say, gardening rather than landscaping in public interest. Obviously, the applicant themselves may choose to undertake some gardening type planting in association to that if they wanted to, shall we say, soften the effect of it. But considering the orientation of the building relative to the, shall we say, the public realm, I think it would probably be how can I put it? Maybe excessive to ask for landscaping in relation to that in terms of the public interest.
Thank you.
Right. I have no questions, so therefore, members, can we proceed to determine this application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor.
I think we have sufficient information.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you wish to start with the having considered the applicant's papers and report of handling by PKC, LDP and all other relevant material and planning conditions. Can you give me your views?
Thanks, Convener. Yes. I think one of the most telling points in the whole of this submission is in the planning report, where it refers to, I think, a standardised or words like that, conservatory. I can understand the reasons why the applicants want to have such a facility. I think that's fairly clear. But I find that the design, and it is a standardised design from a well-known supplier, is not sympathetic enough to the building and the location. And although this isn't immediately on the street view, it is, and that picture there obviously can be seen from the street as well. We've got to think of how this whole building balances out. I have a concern about the degree of underbuilding, and I frankly don't know how the applicant can resolve that, because altering the ground levels would seem to be particularly difficult. So I think, on balance, that I would go with the report of handling on this and the reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. While being sympathetic to the owners of the guest house and the challenges they'll face in creating their own space, I also will agree with the officer's decision that I don't feel this orangery or conservatory enhances or offers anything to, which looks quite an impressive Victorian, I assume, style building. So I feel more than happy to say that it would be unsympathetic, as the officers have stated in their reason. So we'll uphold the officer's reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. And I'm going to make this unanimous, because I agree with my two colleagues that certainly I can sympathise with someone wanting to improve the living spaces and have something like an orangery or a conservatory built on, but I'm afraid that this wouldn't look. It's unsympathetic to the Victorian building that it's going to be attached to. It does not contribute to the visual amenity of the host building. I do have concerns about the levels too, and how that would work out, and how, if you were to try to address that, it might therefore not allow you to get access to the garage, which is not our concerns today, but it's still, it just wouldn't look right. So therefore, I'm afraid that, well, I agree, I should say, with the other two councillors. So therefore, this, we unanimously decide to uphold the officer's decision.
Members, that's, I think, a unanimous decision. Take you to page 29, which is the officer's grounds of refusal. My understanding is at least two, you were quite clear that you were agreeing with that, but Councillor Wilson, you referred to also kind of the general area. The reasons for the refusal are only in relation to the visual amenity of the host building. So I just want to make sure you're all in agreement with that. or are you adding in the amenity of the general area?
No, I have referred to that, but I'm happy to go along with the two reasons, or the one reason, sorry, outlined. There's 2 paragraphs to the reason. On page 29, the word I was looking for was standardised, by the way, earlier on. Yes. It's in line 1 of the reasons for refusal, so I'm happy just to go with the element of the effect on the building itself rather than the surrounding area.
So members, that would be refused in line with the appointed officer's grounds of refusal. Okay.
Yes, we're all happy to agree with that. So in this case, we uphold the officer's decision. So can we now move on to the next item, which is the residential development in principle land 110 metres southeast of Birkfield Park, Rumbling Bridge. Mr. Harrison, oh, sorry. Yes, is there any agent or... Yeah, that would maybe be sensible. Sir, which item are you in for?
I'm here for the last item.
Pardon?
The last item.
Last item. Okay, right. So we'll proceed then, Mr. Harrison, with this item.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, there's a planning application in principle for residential development at land adjacent to Birkfield Park, Rumbling Bridge, Kinross. The site extends to approximately 0.6 hectares and lies adjacent to the junction of the A823 and A977. Farmland lies to the north and ground associated with Birkfield Park to the west. The site contains a number of small trees and scrub and broadly takes the form of a valley running north to south. I'll take you through the photographs now, but you might like to page 72 onwards, which provides you with the location plan and site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be the junction of the site with the A-class roads, views into the site from the eastern boundary onto the A977, views of the site then from the northern boundary onto the field. So I say this is us approaching the junction of the 2 A-class roads, and the application site just indicated in red there. And you can even from this position get a little bit of a feel that the A977 is climbing at this part and the site is falling away from that road. So that A977 is set at a higher level. So if you swing slightly to the left of that photograph, that gives you an indication of some of the site from that similar position, and as you can see the red line beyond the road frontage as well. So it does contain some trees being referred to in the report. Moving as it were a little bit up from that, we move to that corner, and this is as it were looking down the other A-class road, the A823, which is the road which takes you down and across Rumbling Bridge itself. And going down that road a short distance, we can now, from that public road, look into the site itself, and you can begin to get a little bit of a feel for the topography here of the ground, as it were, dipping down from the A977 and then rising slightly to the other side of the application site. So it's in a little bit of a dip here. So moving on from that, up onto the A977, we're now first of all looking in a northeasterly direction, and then there'll be a sequence of photographs swinging round to the left now from that same elevated position. And we see the main body of the site, as it were, looking in a northerly direction, swinging round again to the left of that, looking as it were across the site in a northwest direction, and swinging round again towards the left of that. We look to the excuse me, the end of the site adjacent to the road which takes you down into Rumbling Bridge. And just to give you a little bit of a more detail there, you'll see that the land is falling, say, not only from the road and then back up again, but also falling generally in the direction of the road which takes you down to Rumbling Bridge. And this is the ponding area referred to in the papers. Moving on from that, we move further up the A977. So this is looking back down to where we started down at the junction, and then swinging round to the right of that photograph, we now look down that northeastern boundary of the application site where it abuts the field. If we go from this elevated position down to where you see the yellow dot, as it were, at the bottom of the valley, we then can look back up to where we were, and then there'll be a sequence of photographs swinging round to the right now to give you a view of the site from that northern boundary. So swinging round to the right now, we look across that part of the site. My apologies to the photograph, it was just basically this light being so strong and this time of year and so low, it makes it a bit difficult. Swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we look down the lower part of the application site, and then swinging down to the right of that, we look up to the rising ground towards Rumbling Bridge, and then round to the right again, we're back round to that boundary with the field. Moving on from there, just to the reference to marketing, and yes, there has obviously been some signage on the site in the past. And then again, moving on from this site altogether, the papers refer to LDP E24 as a reference directly to what might potentially happen on the site. This is, of course, up at Pow Mill. This part of the site, in addition to the house, has been developed for recently with a consent for some caravans to be sited there, and you can see the stances that have been formed. And if we go from there further up, we're still having a look at that site, looking back towards another area within the E24 site, just to give you an indication of what the applicant was referring to. So I'll leave you that general photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, in response to reason 1, while the planning application is for residential development, the intention is that the site be developed for a combined residential and employment use. The site has been actively marketed for general industrial purposes over the last 15 years without success. The intention would be to follow the approach for combined housing and employment use as seen at LDP designation E23 at Pow Mill, which is viewed as a resounding success. The first reason for refusal is seen as incorrect, and the proposal is viewed as being entirely consistent with LDP policy ED1. In addition, the general industrial use may affect the amenity of the adjoining houses, unlike a Class 4 use. Regarding the second reason, while it is recognised that the officer has been pragmatic in not requesting a noise survey, this is based on a misconception that the proposal was for housing alone. The applicant would have been willing to submit a noise survey if requested, and considers that this matter could be addressed through a planning condition. Regarding the third reason, the officer's decision that the absence of a tree survey formed grounds for refusal is seen as unfair and unmerited, as this could be dealt with by a condition if planning permission was being granted. Regarding reason 4, it is seen as premature to conclude that the design would not make a positive contribution to the surrounding environment based on an indicative layout plan only. Such design matters could be addressed through a planning condition. In conclusion, the proposal is viewed as being consistent with LDP policy and capable of being developed in a similar way to site E23 at Pow Mill. Outstanding matters regarding noise and tree surveys and layout and design could be addressed through planning conditions. The supporting statement for the planning application has also been received in association with this notice of review submission. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the site is allocated for employment uses in the LDP, reference E24. Policy ED1A of the current local development plan and policy 7A of the proposed local development plan confirm that such allocations be retained for business use. The continued allocation for this site has not been challenged through the local development plan review process. In addition, the settlement boundary in LDP2 at Rumbling Bridge has been drawn to provide more than sufficient opportunities for residential development in terms of land, housing land requirements. Consequently, there is no identified need for additional housing land at this locality that would justify the removal of this employment site. There is a concern that noise from the A977 would be detrimental to a residential use. The noise survey required under policy EP8 was not submitted and was not requested because the development was assessed as being contrary to other local development plan policies. Similarly, a tree survey required under policy NE2B was not requested. The indicative layout shows 5 detached houses served by an access of the A823. While this is an in-principle proposal, the proximity of the site to the A977 and the challenging landform requiring significant re-engineering is not considered to result in a development likely to be compatible with or make a positive contribution to the surroundings. It is anticipated that the development would involve the loss of existing trees, which would take some time to be replaced to provide a landscape context. The site is expected to be very prominent when viewed from the more elevated A977. The proposal is not therefore viewed as complying with local development plan policies PM1A and PM1B. Turning to representations, 7 representations have been received mainly concerning the proposal being contrary to local development plan policy, water, drainage and flooding concerns, road safety concerns and also potential loss of trees. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Is there any questions for Mr. Harrison or officers in this application for review?
Thanks, Convener.
Councillor Wilson.
On pages 75, 76 and 77, we have clearly an outline of the proposed site with the road network on page 75. And then on page 76 and 77, what I regard as a couple of indicative layouts. But given that the application is in principle, should we have much regard for the indicative layouts at all?
Well, you really almost, I feel, to some extent answered your question by pointing out that these are indicative. There would be no obligation in the event of you granting planning permission today for this particular layout to be followed. I think the applicant is simply putting forward an illustration, if I can use that word, of how he envisages the prospect of the site being developed in the event of planning permission being granted.
Thank you.
Councillor Waters, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Convener. Regarding the LDP and LDP2, and you've already given us an introduction on that, and that we're I don't know if imminently is an appropriate word to use, but we are expecting LDP to be signed off by the Scottish Government, having already been submitted and agreed within this council. Was that this parcel of land is deemed to be employment land? We have just finished a process for LDP2. Did the applicant in any way, or has the applicant engaged in any way in LDP2 to try and change this land use from employment land?
No, in short, my understanding is he didn't make a submission as part of the, shall we say, the consultation on LDP2. I think as the papers make clear, he purchased, the current applicant purchased the site in 2016, and obviously the employment designation was in place at that time in any event, and as you have pointed out already, that designation is effectively being carried forward into the new plan from the existing plan. So there has really been no change of circumstance in that context.
Thank you. In regards to, we've also had mention the Palmill site. Does that sit under the same delegation as employment land?
Designation, you mean? Yes. That site, I understand. I'll just get it to hand here. I wonder whether is it easier for me just to simply pass you the local plan that gives you the detail of that rather than me just relating it. That's probably...
I think Councillor Waters, if I can help, so obviously it needs to be pointed out to all members, but in the current LDP, it's page 229 for Power Mill, and it is opportunity site E23. There appears to be a difference with the Rumbling Bridge designation because Rumbling Bridge is employment use, whereas the Power Mill one is employment use with associated residential.
Yeah.
And I know that also in LDP2, which I did find, and it's page 289 on the proposed LDP2, E23 again, employment use with associated residential. And it does say in both of them that single dwelling houses in association with an employment use may be permitted where the employment use can exist as a standalone unit. So Power Mill has not got the same wording as Rumbling Bridge designation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question. The designation for this site is employment land.
That's correct.
Is there enough evidence to say that it has been well marketed as employment land?
Well, we only really have the evidence before you in the statement that there has been marketing and it's been with, shall we say, the company for some considerable time. We have no further information as to, shall we say, the degree to which it's been marketed or how it's been marketed or how frequently it's been marketed beyond that generality, if I can put it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, Mr. Harrison.
Yes.
Yes, happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, PKC, LDP and all other relevant material and planning considerations, can you give your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can see it would be a challenging site, but my belief simply comes down to the core issue of the LDP and the policy that's been the land use that has been delegated as within the LDP, both in LDP, the current LDP and the LDP2. And we've already heard a submission that the weighting, you know, as we come imminently towards LDP2 being the fully approved plan for Perth Kinross Council. I feel I have to agree with officers that it does not sit within the delegated use for that parcel, for that land use. I don't feel the applicant has given any real justification for having housing or residential use there, which we would expect to see through the LDP process. While I have sympathies that possibly with the next LDP, the applicant will have an opportunity to probably engage in that process and build a justification, if there is a justification for having housing within there. So I will go with the officer's recommendation. I'm not regarding the noise and tree surveys and stuff like that. I'm not sure on the relevance of them, and whether they're, agree with the officer. Is there any real need for these, given that there's no justification for the building? So I'm going for refusal on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I don't think this site is suitable for residential development. Some of the reasons have been given in the report. They're quite clear. I think, to be blunt, its designation in the plan as employment land ought to be tested further, and we can look at that on the merits of any proposal that comes in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I would agree with both my colleagues that there would be certainly no justification to go away from the local development plan on this particular site. I think the proposal is contrary to policy ED1 of the Perth Kinross local development plan. A residential development on this site would be contrary to this allocation, and it hasn't been justified. The noise pollution, yes, if it was to be residential, certainly that would have been an issue. Whether it's relevant because we're not proceeding with the housing development, I don't know. Forestry, woodland and trees, regardless of what the site would be developed for, would need to be assessed. I would agree with that. The proposal is resident, but again, in 4, I'm not sure. In the absence of a full application with detailed plans, I'm not quite so sure if item 4 is actually relevant to the refusal, but certainly I agree to refuse on policy ED1, definitely. Thank you.
Members, can I take you to page 47 and 48 of your papers, which is the original decision notice. Can you deal with them in turn? Because obviously there's issues in relation to, from what I've heard, issues between you on the different grounds of refusal. But dealing with number 1 in turn, I think from what I heard is all of you agree with ground of refusal number 1. My query is whether there's been reference to LDP 2 and whether you add in reference to the equivalent policy in the proposed LDP. And I've double checked, it's policy 7A of the proposed local development plan. So it would be, if you're content with this member's proposals contrary to policy ED1 of the Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2014 and policy 7A of the proposed local development plan. And then it goes, I don't know if you want to add anything else. It does say residential development would be contrary to this allocation, and you all refer to it not being justified. So
that would be required.
So do you want to add at the end something like has not been justified? Okay. Now, then we have both 2, 3, and 2, 3, and 4. There were, from what I heard, doubts in your minds as to whether that would be relevant. Of course, in assessment of any application, particularly in principle, there are issues which there's a balancing of the policies, if you like, and yes, if you don't get past 1, you may not necessarily get on to 2 and 3. But looking at it in the round, it could have been submitted, and it's whether you want to include that as a reason for refusal. I mean, it would still stand up in my view as a reason for refusal. It's not my decision, of course. And if you were still relying on it, it would probably also, to be consistent with Ground 1, you would be adding in, after EPA, Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2014, I think it's policy 54 of the proposed local development plan. In terms of the, there's, if you like, it's not been justified in terms of noise impact assessment as well. So I'm kind of looking to all members. You were kind of not actually 100% on this one, but if you're doing a full assessment of an application, including an IPL, it would still be a consideration given the policies in the LDP.
Happy to leave that
Okay.
noise assessment in.
Do you want to add in policy 54 of the proposed local development plan in terms of consistency? Okay. Now, similarly on Ground 3, that's referring to trees, of course, and the policy does say that a tree survey is required from the existing trees on site, so similar reasoning. And maybe members, if you want to add in, it's on the second line, you would add in policy, I think I've got 38B of the proposed local development plan. I will confirm those numbers later on in the proposed development plan. You could add that in. Do you want to add anything else? Is that sufficient?
To enable suitable assessment.
Yes, and that would go towards the at the very end. There are trees on site and no tree survey has been submitted to enable suitable assessment to be carried out, presumably?
To be carried out.
Yeah. Now, then the question is, I think certainly there was some discussion in the questions and then a little bit in your debate and your decision making on Ground 4. And I think the indications were you weren't sure that should be relevant on the basis that you don't, you simply have an indicative plan before you, and you don't have any detailed proposals. So therefore, whether that should actually be relevant at this stage, do you want to include it or don't you want to include it, given it is that they are indicative plans? Councillor?
No. I'm struggling to see the relevance of it, so I'd be happy to have it removed.
I agree.
Yeah, it's not a full application and everything's indicative, so therefore I would remove that one.
In general terms, and I am being sort of very simplistic in what I say, when it's an in principle, you do have only indicative layout plans, and to refuse on that basis has to be something fundamental identified that would indicate that you couldn't have any sort of housing on site. And I think you're indicating you don't feel you're at that stage yet, so therefore remove that ground. Okay.
Yes, so again in 4.2 our decision has been to uphold the officer's decision on this one. So there's no one here to address on that, so we'll move on to 4.3. 4.3 is the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 50 metres southwest of Belfield Woodlands Road, Blairgowrie. Mr Harrison, I'll let you introduce this one.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a planning application in principle for the erection of a house at Belfield Woodlands Road, Blairgowrie. The site extends to some 0.7 hectares of garden ground, which also contains 2 garage workshops associated with Belfield. It has an L-shaped form and contains mature trees, hedging and open lawn. It also has a frontage and access onto Woodlands Road. You might like to have page 151, which provides you with location plan and the site plan. There are, of course, other plans referred to in the text of the applicant's submission as well, on a smaller scale, particularly referring to other sites which he refers to in his papers. The general sequence of the photographs will be the Woodlands Road frontage, then the existing buildings, the narrow section of the application site, and then the wider section of the application site, then the house Belfield itself and the orchard associated with it. So I'll just take you through the photographs now. This is, as I say, us standing in Woodlands Road, looking at the existing access. Of course, the papers refer to an ability to improve that access in the event of planning permission being granted. But you'll see there is a fairly substantial stone wall on that road frontage there, and of course, no pavement, as you'll probably be aware of, at Woodlands Road in general. You start to see some of the outbuildings in this photograph as well. So on the extreme left, we've got Belfield Cottage, which will appear in a later photograph. And then we have the two other garage oblique workshops shown here, which again will be shown in later photographs. So from that position at the access, moving on from there, as it were, down Belfield Road, we get that longer view along the frontage of the application site. And as you can see, the stone wall involved there. And then beyond that, where you see the blue line, we have the other part of the field, which is in the applicant's ownership. So we can go from there down to that other part, where, say, we look at the application site, that northern boundary of the application site, from Woodlands Road, looking at the gate entry into the remainder of the field. So from that position, we now go to the application site itself, and the first building there, Belfield Cottage, which as you can see backs directly onto the application site and even has some window openings onto the application site. And from there, swinging round to the right, we have the first garage workshop building. And then swinging round again to the right of that, we have the second outbuilding. And just to be clear, those buildings are not going to fall within the open space designation as in the LDP revision. Moving on from that, we move into the site itself and the indicative position that the applicant envisages the house being built. This is the former vegetable garden referred to in the papers, and we're looking in a westerly direction there. And if we move from there, as it were, up that boundary, we can look back to this from the other direction. This is now looking in the easterly direction towards the back of the garage workshops. So from there, we can step back again a little bit further to the very corner, as it were, the inside corner of the L shape, looking down the full length of what you might call the narrower section of the L. And then there'll be a sequence of photographs swinging round towards the left from that position. So from that similar position, we look from the corner. We're just catching the corner of the hedge there on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph. And this is us looking across to that northern boundary we saw earlier on. And then swinging to the left of that. Again, we're looking into the larger area of the application site, that westernmost corner. Again, swinging around to the left of that. Again, still looking across the larger area of the application site. Now looking in a southerly west direction. And round to the left of that. And moving towards that southwest boundary. This is where, shall we say, the application site backs onto the remainder of the field which surrounds it on that side. And then, as it were, if we turn round from that position, we look back across that part of the application site and can maybe just pick out Belfield itself. This is the boundary at the rear of Belfield we see in the red line there. And then if we swing round to the right of that, looking in that direction, we get the southeastern boundary, the far boundary on the larger part of the application site. From there, we get the photograph of Belfield itself. This is looking in a northerly direction. And then, again, swinging to the right of that, we have the area to the southeast of Belfield, which is a former orchard, or current orchard, I should say. So I'll just leave you that general photograph of the application site, looking east. Turning in summary, first of all, to the applicant's case, It is envisaged that the house would be located within the narrower element of the L-shaped site, where it would relate to the existing buildings. While the proposed LDP2 is a material planning consideration as it represents the Council's settled view, it is seen as being of limited weight until the outcome of the examination is concluded. Within that plan, the site is the only new area which would be covered by the open space policy at Rosemount. The applicant was not notified as a householder of the proposed change beyond the local press advert. He does not subscribe to that newspaper. He does not consider that he has had the opportunity to submit a representation in relation to LDP2. Policy 14A, Section B of LDP2 is seen as providing an exception to the general presumption against development within the open space area. This states, and I quote, "The proposed development involves a minor part of the site which would not affect its continued use as a recreational or amenity resource." End of quotation. Regarding reason 1, as this is an in-principle application, no details of the house are available, which would allow an assessment against policy PM1A. Regarding reason 2, the existing buildings would largely screen the proposed house in the position identified as it is seen from Woodlands Road. Regarding reason 3, policy 14A of the proposed local development plan relates to existing areas of open space in the Rosemount area. This is the only new area of open space. The adjacent field to the west and the south is in the applicant's ownership and is part of the designated open space, unlike the site which is white land in the current local development plan and private garden ground. It is noted that garden ground at Carey Cottage and Oak Dean have been deleted from the open space designation in the local development plan too, on the basis that they are well contained by hedges. References made to the reporter's comment in relation to policy 14 in LDP2 that, and I quote, "The proposed designation allows for small-scale development within well-defined garden grounds and covers other areas which contribute to the special character of Rosemount and should be retained." End of quotation. The site is seen as being well contained and existing trees can be protected by the use of planning conditions. This site is the only garden ground covered by this policy. It is also noted that exceptions have been made in granting consent for a number of other houses elsewhere in the locality. In conclusion, the proposal is not considered to erode the rural qualities of the area. The current LDP policy RD1 supports residential development. Local Development Plan 2 Policy 14A Clause B supports small-scale development, and the open space designation is seen as disproportionate compared to the 2 gardens that have been removed from that designation. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the site falls within the settlement area of Blairgowrie and Rattray, covered by Local Development Plan Policy RD1, where there can be opportunities for residential development, subject to the consideration of potential conflict with existing built environment. The policy criteria recognises prospects for infill development where this respects and improves the environment. The policy also seeks to retain private open space of amenity value. This site is identified as white land in the current local development plan. However, with the exception of the existing garage and outbuilding area, LDP2 identifies the site as part of the open space designation at Rosemount. No representation objecting to this designation was received during the local development plan consultation process. Consequently, the designation was not before the reporter as part of the LDP examination. LDP 2 is now at an advanced stage. Therefore, it is considered that significant weight should be given to policies 14 and 14A. These policies seek to retain areas of amenity and recreational open space in this locality free from further development. Except in some very limited circumstances in relation to ancillary recreational purposes, there is a presumption against further house building within the open space designation. The applicant's view that there is support for the proposal under current Local Development Plan Policy CF1 Part B is not accepted, as that criteria concerns the development of a minor part of a site in a way that does not affect its continued use for recreational or amenity open space purposes. In this instance, the development is seen as impacting on the sense of openness of the locality and the visual continuity, connectivity, between Woodland Road and the undeveloped area to the southeast, over and above the limitations presented by the existing outbuildings. The proposal is also seen as creating an undesirable precedent for further development, which would be contrary to Policy 14A of LDP2. Although there are no details of the proposed house at this in principle stage, it is anticipated that development of this site would detract from the wider landscape context and the semi-rural character of the locality. This proposal seeks to protect, this policy seeks to protect open space from development that does not contribute to its use for recreational or amenity purposes. In this context, the development of the land for a house would result in a loss to the local community in terms of amenity value in the officer's opinion. Regarding representations, there has been one objection, mainly concerning the narrowness of Woodlands Road and its use by traffic. In this case, there is a request for a site visit. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Is there any questions for officers or Mr. Harrison on this application for review? Ms. Wilson?
I have no questions this time.
Mr. Waters?
I have no questions either.
Can I ask myself, Mr. Harrison, as regards the white ground, would that be the whole of the ground within the blue area on these maps, or is it just the red area? I'm referring to
page 151.
53.
153.
153.
Right. I wonder whether it would be, well, 153, the aerial photograph there shows basically all the land in the applicant's ownership, and that's what the blue line's representing. It might be more useful to turn over to 151. And your question was how much of the land is white land as opposed to, should we say, land within the open space designation, if I understand it correctly, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Basically, no, I probably need to, I'm conscious I'm going to try and describe something which is, maybe have to hold it up for you here. Right. The application site is all white land within the current local development plan. The area surrounding it is within the open space designation currently, as is the orchard area on this side of Belfield. Does that help you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us, that is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, Mr. Harrison?
Yes. Yeah, happy to proceed.
Thank you. I shall lead on this one, and I've looked carefully at this, and it is a little bit confusing. It's an awkward shaped area, and I do have concerns about the size of it and the position of the house in principle, and I cannot see, with the taking into consideration that it will be in LDP2 as green space, I am uncomfortable with this coming forward. So therefore, it is contrary to policy PM1A of the Perth Kinross local plan, and therefore I would uphold the officer's decision. It is also contrary to policy PM1B of the Perth Kinross local plan 2014, and in PM1A, any additional development would severely limit the prospects of making a positive contribution in this area. So I would uphold the officer's decision this time. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. I consider that this proposal is not in compliance with the local development plan, either the LPD1 or LPD2, and I think LPD2 reinforces it. I just see it as a proposal to build residential development on green space. I have a concern that it will create a potential where there might be further applications to erode the green spaces around this area of Rosemount and Blairgowrie, and therefore I would strongly support your reasons for refusal.
Councillor Waters?
I also feel the designation with the area from between the changing from the white space in the Perth Kinross local plan, the current version to the new version, which again we're expecting to be signed off very soon, to change that to open space. I feel, in line with my two colleagues here, that it will erode the semi-rural nature of the Rosemount area, and the officers are correct in their decision not to refuse this application. So I
Thank you, colleagues. This has just gone through 3 now, and they're all unanimous. But, that is the way things are going today at the moment.
Members sorry, can we take you to page 137 to the terminology for the grounds for refusal? You're more or less in line with the 3 grounds of refusal, as I've heard. Could I make a suggestion for tidying up? It's a matter for you, but you've done it before in previous meetings. Line 1 on ground 1 previously, proposal contrary PM1A, it would be the Perth Kinross local development plan, yes. 2014. Now, Convener, you said something that the other members didn't, were agreeing with, but didn't really expressly refer to. But you were referring to any additional development would severely limit prospects of making a positive contribution to the area. Are you wanting that phraseology into the ground for refusal? Because it's slightly different, it's more definite in there, whereas you're talking about something in the future. Do you want that phraseology?
If my colleagues would agree with that, I think that should be in, if it's competent.
I Convener, would be happy to support that in my reference to potential future developments. Had that point in mind.
Yes.
Yeah, happy to have that included.
So I think if any additional development would severely limit the prospects of contributing or making a positive contribution. And then it would run on to the quality of the surrounding built natural environment. Ground 2, again, I would suggest on line 1 that it's Perth Kinross Local Development Plan 2014. Are members content with it otherwise, or any further changes?
There's, when viewed from the public road, area in particular, when viewed from the public road, would maybe be added in.
Our members, well, I think that would be line 4, so particularly
Yeah.
when viewed from the public road. Now, is that public road that can be, well, a public road or public road and designated open space that can be assessed by the public? Are you adding it into what's existing? Or instead
I
of?
would like to suggest that, if my colleagues
Yes, I
agree with
think
it.
add in.
Add in, okay. And then ground 3, are you content with that?
The last designation, comma, take out set and undesirable, and perhaps wording such as may be cited by others as President. So my colleagues happy with that?
Okay. Yes, I've got that.
Yeah. If that's competent.
Okay, yes.
Right.
Thank you. That's that is 4-3 now completed. And one of my colleagues is suggesting a comfort break. Can we go and have a comfort break for 10 minutes?
Happy to agree to that. I think given that we've still got 3 items to go, maybe we'll have 3 items to go. We'll maybe take slightly longer than the regulation 4 minutes that you allow can do. 10 minutes sounds a good start.
Thank you. So we'll have a comfort break of 10 minutes. Thank you for your patience. We'll now move on to our next item, which is 4.4, and it's application under section 42 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997 to remove condition 3 from the occupancy of permission of Easter Comrie, Keltneyburn, Aberfeldy. Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the removal of condition 3 regarding occupancy of planning permission 10/00184/FLL concerning the erection of a dwelling house and agricultural shed, formation of new access road at Easter Comrie, Keltneyburn, Aberfeldy. Condition 3 restricts occupancy of the house to a person solely or last employed locally in agriculture at Comrie Farm, Keltney Bridge, or a dependent or such a person, including a widow or widower of such a person. I'll just take you to the photographs now. You might like to page 212 onwards, which provides you with the location plan and site plan, including other land previously which was part of Comrie Farm. The photographs will first of all show Easter Comrie, which is what we see on the screen at the moment. Then the, as it were, the leased land referred to in the papers. And then the original farmhouse and the steading buildings which have been converted. And then finally the land which has been sold as part of the deer farm. So I say in the first photograph here, we see Easter Comrie as it's seen from the public road looking up the hill, as it were. And then just to get a little bit closer to that, we see the house itself from within ground which is identified within the plans as partly within the applicant's ownership. When you look at the plan, the photograph, you'll see there's an outbuilding on the right-hand side of the house as well, which is this building, which I understand he uses in relation to his deer stalking activities. And then if we turn round from that more elevated position, we can look in the opposite direction, and this is us looking down towards the public road and, of course, the valley beyond. Just give you an indication of the landscape context in that northerly direction. Moving on from that, as it were, back down to the public road, we see the part of the leased land. And again, I'm sorry about the photograph, but the brightness and lowness of the sun made that a bit difficult. But the position of Easter Comrie is, as I say, just at the top of the hill there, identified in the photograph. And so this is that area on the plan which is leased. So swinging round to the right of that, we have the majority of the remainder of the leased land. And we're looking beyond that towards where the agricultural shed and are mainly associated with the bit of farmland which is retained by the applicant's father, and also in the trees there and a bit beyond the actual farmhouse and the steading conversion. So as it were, if we go up the road to that, we come to the farmhouse, and then the steading conversion, which is close to the farmhouse. And if we go, that's one aspect of it as well, and that's another aspect of the steading conversion, which is referred to in the papers. So if we move on from that, this takes us further up the road to the part of or just an illustration of the land which has been sold, which forms part of the deer farm, and obviously you can see some deer there. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case. Since 2012, the applicant's father has sold 170 acres forming the deer farm and renewed the lease on some 155 acres of the original 370-acre farm holding. Since then, his mother's health, and more recently his father's health, deteriorated to the extent of requiring a high level of medical support. This has created a need for additional finance, and his father has been obliged to retire from farming also. The applicant was previously involved in the operation of deer stalking and the sporting enterprise until that aspect was sold in 2016. The applicant now works full-time out with farming. In that sense, the original circumstances that provided a justification for the house no longer exists. However, he still considers his work in supporting his father's aspect of the farm is essential to the practical operation of that remaining part of the farm holding. He is also involved in a deer stalking enterprise at Garth Estate, which he partly owns, and general maintenance, deer and pest management on the leased land. The shed at Easter Comrie is used for the storage of equipment and machinery. The applicant is seeking the removal of the condition to raise a mortgage for the extension of the house following the arrival of their third child since 2010. The applicant's wife uses one of the 4 bedrooms as an office. Attention is drawn to the recent removal of occupancy conditions at Nether Blelock Farm by Bank Foot and other instances within the Perth and Kinross Council area as precedents in support of his application. Turning now in summary to the report of handling, planning permission was granted for this house in 2010. The approval for a house in the countryside was justified as being required for an essential farm worker to support the 350-acre farm owned by the applicant's father. At that time, his father was no longer able to farm on his own. The part of the land that was leased at that time was to be taken back into the farm holding along with the erection of a new farm building. In 2012, as the house was being completed, 155 acres of the land was leased again to others, and in 2016, a further 170 acres forming the deer farming enterprise was sold. The applicant's father has retained 20 acres, and the applicant only owns the house and a small area of surrounding land. The applicant currently works out with the farm and seeks the removal of the occupancy condition to assist in obtaining a mortgage to finance the extension of the house. Local Development Plan Policy RD3, and specifically Category 3.3 of the Housing in the Countryside Guide 2012, are directly relevant to the assessment of this application. The guide states that houses granted planning permission on the basis of a need for a local or key worker may be restricted by an occupancy condition in order to ensure that the house remains as essential worker housing in perpetuity. It is recognised that the advice and guidance contained in the Chief of Planner's letter of 2011 and subsequently in Circular 3, 2012 are material planning considerations. In cognizance of the letter in the circular, the Council no longer restricts occupancy where the economic need for a house has been justified. However, in this case, the agricultural justification for the house has been removed through the sale and long-term leasing of the farmland. The house has effectively been detached from the farm holding. The proposal has therefore been assessed as relating to a standalone dwelling and, as such, does not comply with any of the categories of Policy RD3 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide of 2012. While sympathetic to the applicant's changed family circumstances, these are not considered to provide a justification for setting aside development plan policy. The agent has submitted a list of other instances where agricultural occupancy conditions have been removed. These examples are not assessed as being directly comparable to this case or of sufficient weight, as the house involved is still associated with the operation of land. The houses involved, that is, are still associated with the operation of the land. In this case, there are no representations, and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for Mr Harrison or officers?
Thanks, Convener. The photograph we saw of the Stedding development, have they been sold off privately?
My understanding, yes, they have. I mean, they are, I think it's something like 20 or 25 years ago that conversion was taking place. There's quite some time ago that took place on the farm.
But they're not associated with the farm anymore?
My understanding is they're not. In fact, one of them's for sale via Savills at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Regarding the options open to us or open to the applicant, where a farm has been sold, leased off, and is no longer has that firm connection with the house which was built as a farmhouse effectively. Is there any other options that still meet within our RD3 policies that would be open either to us in this committee or to the applicant?
Well, I suppose as in all cases, a condition can be the subject of an application to have it removed, or it could be subject to a condition to have it varied in some way as well, if the original condition wasn't seen to be, as I suspect you're suggesting, as relevant as it was when it was originally subject to the original planning application. So there are some other options if an applicant wished to come forward with them, yes.
And regarding the potential, and it is a bit hypothetical, I think, because it would be up to the applicant, but there is
Indeed.
there is the potential that the applicant can look for some variation of the policy which kind of protects the principle set out in the Council Housing in the Countryside Guide, but at the same time allows the flexibility within the linked to a farm that does not no longer exists as effectively as it did.
Yes, obviously it would be different in different circumstances, and it's maybe not quite the proposal that's in front of you today. But obviously, as in looking at the proposal that's here, this was linked to Comrie Farm, as quite clearly stated. If there was, for example, a different form of occupancy which fulfilled a link with some other rural activity, as in terms of a key worker or an essential worker, there could potentially be a change of circumstances there. But just to be clear, that's not what's actually in front of you today.
Okay, thank you.
Mr Harrison, the applicant cites other removals of condition 3 of occupancy as a precedence. Are they in the same circumstances? Have you knowledge if any of these were in the same circumstances as the applicant is?
You're referring to the list that you have in your papers, yes?
Yeah, I know it's quite a comprehensive list, so I wouldn't ask you for everyone.
That's what I was slightly concerned about, in the sense that, to be quite candid, I'm not in a position to know the detail of these individually, to answer your question with confidence, to be quite frank. I wouldn't want to say something which might mislead you in any sense. There are obviously very often slightly different circumstances between all these cases.
Thank you. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by Mr Harrison, Planning Advisor.
Yes, happy to.
Councillor Wilson, do you wish to lead on this one? Given that, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, PKC LDP, and all other relevant material planning considerations, you wish to give us your views?
Thanks, Convener. Yes. I find this one a wee bit more difficult in terms of balance. I can understand why the planning officer has provided the report they have done, because if you're involved in making an empirical assessment of this application, I think they were probably, that's about the only conclusion they could come to. However, I think there are three circumstances that we need to keep in mind. First of all, Scottish Government policy has changed on this occupancy issue quite substantially. The lid was taken off the can by the McKinnon letter, and that's been followed up by further guidance. Secondly, we have the personal circumstances of the family. We need to think carefully about how much weight we give to that. And the third thing is 10 years from the original application, or almost 10 years now. Agriculture and a lot of land-based industries have changed remarkably in that decade. And therefore, I'm on balance inclined to allow the review, although it clearly it's challenging to policy. But I think we've recognised where we are now with this. Any time we do this, there will always be the question, will this create a precedent? Well, we've got 3 pages of precedents here, which may or may not be directly applicable here. However, there will be each of these have been judged on their own merits at the time, and we need to judge this one on its own merits. So, in balance, I'm in favour of allowing the review.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Waters.
Yeah, I echo some of Councillor Wilson's views on this. It's a very difficult situation where the farm doesn't exist in the same way it did almost a decade away, and it creates a bit of a conundrum. What happens to this condition which ties the house to the farm? And I'm going to agree with Councillor Wilson on this one, that you know, and we're putting everything, you know, all the circumstances, including the personal circumstances of the applicant, and I'm going to agree and say that we should allow this review to pass.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. This is going to have to be a majority one, because I've looked at this carefully. We have mentioned that there are options. This is very challenging. This whole policy on key workers is very challenging. I understand that. I can also understand why the officer has refused this, and my opinion would have been, well, is to uphold the officer's decision. So it will be a 2-1 in support of the applicant. So the applicant has been successful in has a review, and therefore I will now ask the legal advisor to clarify or confirm the decision.
Thank you, Convener. What I'm writing down here is on a 2-1 vote, essentially allow the review subject to suitable conditions. I mean, I think essentially it'll be a removing of it, but we'll put the normal phraseology on, informatives and terms. And that's on the basis, now I'm paraphrasing at the moment, but basically I think, if I recall the 3 points you made, it would be the recognising the Scottish Government Circular 3, 2012, if I remember right.
Yes.
And that's on planning obligations in relation to occupancy conditions. And then recognising the change in circumstances. Yep. Now, members, we'll be a bit careful there, because normally, of course, we're about land use rather than change in personal circumstances. But of course, I think it's quite clear it's no longer part of the farm. And is that the part you're recognising?
I think, Convener, the circumstances are twofold. First of all, there are personal circumstances here that have been explained on a factual basis, unemotionally, I would say, right? And that's helpful. And I did say unemotionally, just for the tape. And secondly, or thirdly, I think we need to think about the changes there have been in agriculture. And this is a highland rural area with a mixture that's not the conventional mixture of lowland farming. So I think there have been changes as well as the personal circumstances. And I would cite that as a reason.
The third aspect was the change in farming practice. Okay, members content with that? Okay.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 4.5, which is the erection of a shed, 10 Kinmond Drive, Perth. Mr. Harrison, will you give us your review on this?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of a shed at 10 Kinmond Drive, Perth. The single-storey pitched roof shed would be located in the rear garden of this semi-detached house. It would measure some 5.6 metres by 4.5 metres, with some 3 metres to the ridge. It would be of a hardwood timber construction. The rear garden measures 7.5 metres by some 10 metres. The specific purpose of the shed would be to accommodate a snooker table. And I'll just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to page 237 onwards to provide you with a location plan and site plan and, of course, drawings of the shed. The photographs will simply be the street frontage and then the rear garden with its adjoining properties. So I say this is on Kinmond Drive, and number 10 The applicant's house is identified there with its parking area to the front of it. So if we go from that position right through to, as it were, the back garden area, there's a sequence of photographs swinging to the left here. This is us looking towards the east boundary, and obviously a certain amount of garden furniture and the like in the adjoining property. Obviously, the applicant appears to be storing some of his materials on site at present, so that's what you see in the foreground here. But swinging to the left of that, we see more of those materials, but that's, of course, just to be clear, his boundary goes to the top of the fence you see there. And swinging round to the left of that again, we look down to the rear garden area. And swinging round again to the left, we've got the top of the one of the sheds in the adjoining property on that western boundary. And then again to the left of that, we catch the extension on the adjoining detached house and the small greenhouse as well on that western boundary. And then, of course, swinging round to the left of that again and stepping back a bit, we catch the rear elevation of the applicant's house. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph. In summary of the applicant's case, the applicant's first proposal for a larger shed was declined. This proposal has reduced its size and a garage door added to one elevation to facilitate queuing. At the suggestion of the planning officer, the previous flat roof has been replaced with a pitched roof to improve its appearance. The shed would only occupy some 33% of the rear garden area. It would be well constructed and would not be detrimental to the area. None of the neighbours have objected to the proposal. The applicant is willing to meet any conditions, including the removal of the shed, should he move house, as the shed is not seen as a permanent structure. Since the previous proposal, it is noted that a large conservatory extension, in addition to two other garden buildings, are now present in the adjoining rear garden. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, this proposal requires planning permission as permitted development rights are suspended through the conditions of the original planning permission for this housing development. This restriction was applied due to the limited private amenity space of the semi-detached and terraced houses, and the prospect of later extensions and outbuildings adversely affecting neighbouring amenity. This proposal is seen as having an excessive footprint relative to the limited size of the garden. It would occupy some 25 square metres of the 70 square metres rear garden area. It is the officer's view that the garden is not sufficiently large to accommodate the building without adversely affecting the residential amenity of the existing house and the ability of the remaining garden ground to accommodate such domestic elements as a drying area and bin storage, contrary to Local Development Plan Policy RD1, Criteria C. It is noted that the draft placemaking guidance envisages a minimum garden area for a 3-bedroom house to be 80 square metres. The proposal is not seen as adversely affecting the amenity of neighbours, and it is acknowledged that a future occupant could remove the shed. In this case, there are no representations, and similarly, there is no request for either a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Have we any questions for Mr. Harrison on this matter?
Could I just ask for clarification? The applicant has said this takes up a third of the site.
That's correct, yes.
And the
33%.
planning service have said that it takes up 25 metres of 70 metres.
That's right.
So there's
It's a slight difference.
a difference, but not a huge difference.
Mm.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waters, have you got any questions?
I'm just trying to picture the location of the shed within the garden, because we've seen a sunroom, a gazebo type thing next door, which would obviously be jammed up against the house. But I'm trying to and I've got the bit here, and I'm trying to draw a wee plan to understand where in the gardening the sheds that it does seem to be kind of sit in the middle of the garden, but more to one side. Is that right?
Well, that's basically correct. That's why I've left this photograph up. This is looking towards the shall we say, more of the corner where the shed would be sited. I wonder if page 237 might help you here.
237.
Mm-hmm. Will I give you my version, because it might be easier looking at it in a paper form. This shows you the house.
Yeah.
Boundary.
That's the boundary.
Effectively red line there. And that's the position of the shed.
So that's about 2.5. 2.5 there, it said.
It's basically, if it helps you, that's 1 to 100 square.
6, so 1, 2, 2, just
Each-
under
each-
3
Each
metres.
square is a metre by
Yeah,
metre. Yeah.
just under 3 metres from the house. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Members, can we proceed to determine this application for review based on the information that is before us? That is information contained in papers and presentation by the planning advisor. Happy to proceed?
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Waters, will you, can you, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling by PKC, LDP and all other relevant material considerations, give your views?
Yeah, I'm going to uphold the reasons given by the officers for refusal, that it is over intensive. It's the location, site and size of it is very, very dominant and will be to the detriment of the amenity of the house and the garden. So I will uphold the officer's reason for refusal.
Councillor Wilson.
Well, we may have a difference of opinion on this one, Convener. This is the applicant's, I think, second attempt at a planning application for the shed. The circumstances, the photographs were particularly helpful, Convener, because this development, Persimmon Homes, have small gardens. There are a whole variety of additional developments within these gardens. We saw the conservatory just in a photograph recently. There are items of play equipment in the gardens. There are small greenhouses and sheds, etc. In a variety of different circumstances. Now, I have no right to pry into folks' back gardens, but on occasion, as a local member, Convener, I'm invited into the back gardens to see one thing or another. So I think that there are almost a Heinz 57 varieties of development of these back gardens. And whilst this shed is substantial, and I can understand the planning officer's view on it, because they are taking the rules and applying them, I think there's sufficient leeway here for a variety of reasons. One is the applicant has made an attempt to reduce the size of the shed. You can only reduce the size of the shed to a certain degree if you want to play snooker. And they've already got garage doors, I think, were referred to, that would be open. I can't quite see snooker being played in weather like this, Convener, but that's a private matter for the applicants to deal with. There are no objections from local neighbours. The shed can be dismantled and taken away and possibly resold if folk get fed up of playing snooker, or if the folks in the house decide to move. And as I've referred to earlier, there are already a variety of other permitted developments and within the rules of permitted development, such as play equipment and bins, etc., in gardens, and a variety of applied for and allowed developments in forms of garden sheds, greenhouses and conservatories are already present in the immediate vicinity. So therefore I would go with upholding the review on this occasion.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I am going to disagree with you on that point. I agree with Councillor Waters. It's cramped and over-intensive. I can understand why someone would want this, a snooker table, and they would want enough room around about it to play. And therefore, that is the reasoning, and I appreciate them coming back with a new application, smaller. But looking at this here and working it out, this is not a shed. This is a building comparable to a garage. If I was wanting to garage my car, I'd be looking for a 16-foot by 13-foot shed, garage, whatever you wish to call it. That put in a back garden that size, and looking at the photograph and considering it will be away from the fences to allow them to get round about it, is going to be very much putting a quart into a pint pot. So I uphold the officer's reasons for refusal. It's cramped and over-intensive, and it's just not for that site. So 2 to 1, I'm afraid that I have to definitely agree with the officer's decision.
Members, what I have written down here, I'll take you to page 241, both members who refused. I didn't hear any suggestion of any changes to the ground of refusal that the officer had. Are you in agreement with the terms of that?
Very happy with
Yes. So that would be refused in similar terms to the officer. And Councillor Wilson, the minority view, I think the way I took it is you felt it accorded with the development plan for the reasons you outlined.
Just to be clear, I don't think it does accord with the development.
Right, okay.
Okay. But I think due to the circumstances locally that I outlined, that it would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we'll move on to the final item 5.1, which is the formation of vehicular access in retrospect. Is the gentleman wish to come further forward? You're quite happy there? Yes, well, thank you for your patience. It's South Inch Michael Farm, Errol, and I'll hand over to Mr. Williams to give us Mr. Harris. What am I talking about? So, Harrison, yes. Sorry, getting fatigued. Mr. Harrison to present the review.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the formation of a vehicular access in retrospect at South Inchmichael Farm, Errol. Planning permission was granted for the formation of an alternative access in March 2017. This application concerns a revision to the route of that access road. I'll maybe just take you through the photographs now, but you might like to have page 285 onwards, which provides you with the location plan and the site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be the existing access, and then the proposed access point, and then the existing business sheds and agricultural site shed. So I'll just take you to the existing access at the moment. This is the access onto the public road, and the photographs taken from the public road looking up the track towards, well, you can see on the right-hand side of the photograph the farmhouse as it is, and beyond that, behind the trees, are the agricultural buildings which will appear in later photographs. But if we move from that position slightly to the left, we can still see the access and also in a sense, the reason why there was considered to be a need to relocate that point of entry onto the public road because of the high wall which carries on in the other direction there, which obviously restricts visibility. So moving from the existing access, we're still on the public road, but we go down to the proposed point of entry, which, as you can see, has been formed, as I mentioned earlier, as a partially retrospective application, and you can see its position relative to the existing access point still shown in yellow. So if we've moved from that position, as it were, up the access road as it's been formed by going forward, this is us now standing in the access road, and you can see the sheds I mentioned earlier, which have now got planning permission to be used as business units and storage for business purposes and storage and distribution purposes. And here we have the access as it was formed at that time through the field. So if we carry on up that access road, it takes us towards the point where there, as it were, is a link through into the existing access to take you through to the farmhouse, where you see this gate, which appears in the next photograph. But you can see that the red dotted line gives you an indication of, as it were, the general route of the approved access, if I can call it that. So if we move to that position, as I say, this is the spur which has been formed from the access which has been formed through the hedge, as it were, into the existing access road, and then beyond that into the grounds or curtilage of the farmhouse. So swinging slightly to the left of that, we look down the remainder of the access road which has been formed. This, of course, is particularly the section which has been, as I can put it this way, added to the approved section of road, and as you can see, is on the field side of the hedge, which encloses the existing access route. And beyond that, of course, we have the former agricultural buildings. So if we carry on up that route, that takes us into the entry where we, shall we say, join the hard standing surrounding the agricultural buildings. If we go into that hard standing, we can then look back down the access road that's been formed on the field side of the hedge. And then if we step back from that again, we can see both the existing access route and the proposed access from within the yard area associated with the buildings. So if we turn round from that position and step back, we look across the hard standing associated with the agricultural building, and you can see in the foreground here a certain amount of steelwork, and that's connected with the proposals for a replacement agricultural shed which has planning permission. And just to give you an indication, this was taken, as you can see, in July of the year when a certain amount of preparatory work had been undertaken, and that's us looking back to the agricultural buildings that were originally on the site and now part of the business buildings. And if we swing round to the left of that, we're looking up, say, the remainder of area of created hard standing for the prospective agricultural building. And just to bring you up to date, this is obviously currently the building is now well in advance of being erected. We may come back to an aspect of that a little later on. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the section of the access road on the field side of the hedge. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the access that has been formed is seen as being little different from that which has been approved and, in that respect, has much the same impact on the character of the area. The approved and installed routes of the access are shown on page 287. The access that has been built partly overlaps with the approved and largely runs parallel to the existing track. The applicant is willing to close the existing entrance with a hedge and remove, aerate, cover with soil and seed the sections of the existing track that would become redundant. He is also willing to plant hedging on the countryside boundary of the proposed access. regarding potential archaeology at this location, it is noted that the investigations have indicated that no archaeological remains have been found. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, planning permission for the access granted in March 2018 was the subject of a condition requiring an archaeological investigation to be undertaken prior to the commencement of works. This was not undertaken, and an enforcement notice regarding the breach of the planning condition was served in February 2019. This proposal seeks to regularise the unauthorised development. The formation of an alternative access to replace the existing entry is seen as acceptable in principle. It provides a safer point of entry and more suitable provision for the turning of larger vehicles, and therefore is acceptable to transport planning. However, this proposal creates two access roads running in parallel instead of connecting with the existing roadway to minimise the land involved in this archaeologically sensitive area. The works that have been carried out are assessed as having already damaged any archaeological remains that were present. If the road was being reinstated, Perth Kinross Heritage Trust recommend that an early consultation should be undertaken to avoid further disturbance of any such remains. While the existing road is enclosed by a hedge, the access that has been formed is open to the countryside and is seen as being highly visible. In this case, there are no representations. I should maybe mention that this item has been continued from the first consideration in July of this year. The applicant, and at that time the local review body asked that the applicant be requested to submit further information on the prospective scheme of landscaping referred to in the applicant's notice of review submission, together also with the proposed structural landscaping for the entire existing and proposed building group at South Inchmichael Farm, which would be served by the proposed access. I've mentioned that the landscaping scheme submitted and associated comments are on page 313 onwards. The landscaping included the proposals approved in relation to the change of use of the original buildings for business and storage distribution purposes. However, since then, planning permission has been granted for a new agricultural shed and hard standing, which is now substantially erected over most of the western section of the landscaping that you see in the papers. In this case, I would indicate that there has been a request for a site visit from the applicant. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Harrison. Are there any questions for Mr Harrison officers on this application? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Mr Harrison, there's quite a lot of reference to archaeological remains. Do we know, in essence, what they are?
I think
I still haven't read through the papers. It's an ancient monument. Yeah.
It's a prehistoric settlement, but to answer your question, the detail of the archaeological remains is part of what is almost unknown at the moment.
Right, so
the investigations.
that's still a mystery.
Yes, but what is known is that it's an area which is seen as sensitive and has the prospect of producing archaeological remains.
Okay. Previously, all of this land was cultivated over a period, a number of years. I think that's a fact. And up until fairly recently, I don't quite know the definition of fairly recently, but substantial areas have been ploughed. Will that not have had some effect on if the possibility of putting the track of a road in or planting trees or a hedge might disturb the archaeological remains? Will they not already been disturbed to a fair degree already by normal agricultural practice, including fairly deep ploughing given modern equipment?
There is always that prospect. Again, it's almost you're asking me to give you some assurance over a situation which is unknown. It's not uncommon for archaeological remains to be in fields that are cultivated, and also it's not uncommon for remains to be found in those circumstances, even although there has been cultivation over some time, which may not be immediately obvious. I'm not sure whether my answer is helping you, but the fact that it was being cultivated doesn't necessarily mean that an assumption can be made that there is no archaeological remains of any worth still to be found, whether it's in this circumstance or some other circumstance.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Waters, do you have any questions?
Just on the same line, the Perth Kinross Heritage Trust also responded to this application, and I think one of their comments at the end was that they noted, as you've noticed in the full application that happened before, regarding a full archaeological assessment to be given. Their belief is that this document still remains valid in relation to this site, so there's still the requirement for it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my belief in this is that we also have new information on landscaping and that, which have they been contacted on any issues with that, or is there any archaeological stuff being done in relation to that?
I'm not sure I'm quite fully following your line. Which page are you referring to?
It's page 309. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. The condition that was given for the initial track,
yes,
which was put in. The archaeological, or one of the condition 4 off the top of my head, I believe it was,
yeah,
said that there had to be a full archaeological
That's right.
assessment
Yes.
Does that still, and according to this letter, they believe it does still stand. Does that still stand as very relevant before we proceed any further, as the initial application outlined? Is it still a relevant factor on doing anything else with this, or progressing any further with this application, or the ability to proceed with this? Does it not still require that condition to be fulfilled from the initial application in 2017?
To be candid, I'm not quite sure I've quite got the thing. Obviously, as you say, the consent was granted, and it was requiring the archaeological work to be done prior to works taking place. The works have taken place. My understanding, the enforcement notice has been served because that is effectively a breach of both the conditions, and because the alignment of the access is also not in accordance with the plans. So we've moved to a situation where there's, I would suggest, uncertainty as to whether because the investigation has not been carried out in full, there is uncertainty about what damage may or may not have taken place, and also uncertainty as to whether there's just basically uncertainty around the whole archaeological situation. To answer your question, the condition is there and it's been breached, and the planning authority, as I understand, is in the position of having to decide whether it wishes to exercise its discretion to undertake enforcement notice, and it has done so. So my understanding is also they are awaiting the outcome of this retrospective application to see whether or not they will, or how they might continue to pursue that. And I'm not quite sure I'm quite answering your question.
No. I'm trying to. One of my main concerns with this is that more damage could be done to the archaeological. We can't change if there's damage being done. There's nothing we can do to change that. But in making our decision, I want to ensure that there's no more potential, and we have all the safeguards in place to ensure there's no more potential danger can be done to any potential archaeological artefacts or anything else within the locality of the original proposed road and the new roads, as far as I would see it, potentially be covered under the same archaeological survey, to give assurance that
I think it'd be quite hard for myself to, well, first of all, I don't think it would be my position to give you that assurance in any event, but recognising that what we have here is a road which has been partially formed. There is, of course, the prospect that if that road being brought into full use, it may have to be more works may need to be done to make it a more serviceable road, and those works, depending on exactly what they are in terms of the detailing, may continue to affect the land in some way, or the drainage from the roads into the land. You've seen in the photographs that the entry is, shall we say, at a higher level of specification than you see in the photograph here. So the entry is, for example, concrete curbing at that point, which would be quite understandable as an entry onto a public road. Whether the specification for the road ultimately to serve both the agricultural building, which is under construction, and the business use of the buildings there would be adequately serviced by a road of that nature, is, I think, well, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions whether that is actually workable and sensible, or whether further works would be involved.
Commissioner, if I could come in a different way of thinking. And Mr. Harrison can correct me if I'm wrong at any point, but my understanding, page 309, you'll see it's dated 21st May 2019.
Yeah.
Now, of course, at that point you have a track built, but perhaps not fully formed. I don't know, I can't say that further PKHT know what that fully formed, all the details are needed to make it fully formed, all the works needed to make it fully formed. But the other aspect I'm going to say is that, to my knowledge, I'm actually looking at more Mr. Williams and Mr. Harrison here. It was the LRB in July continued it for the landscaping sort of details. I am not aware of PKHT having those before them. So as far as I'm aware, they have not looked at that. And then you'd enter another difficulty, as a sense of, I couldn't tell you whether they could do a desktop study and look at it and come back on that, or whether they themselves would want further investigation done to kind of be able to come back. I'm not sure if Mr. Harrison and Mr. Williams want to add to that.
I'd maybe draw your attention to page 323, which has got, shall we say, in addition to the consultation reply you're referring to there, as an additional comment, as it were, which is more up to date. This is dated 23rd of October of this year, from Claire Henderson, which I can only assume is the same Claire Henderson that we see on page 309.
Sorry, I haven't actually recognised it. It's probably the same person.
Yes.
That's right, yes.
So that may give you a more up-to-date situation as far as it's viewed by that consultee.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, you want another?
Thanks, Commissioner. Just to follow on that vein to a degree, and this is not a hypothetical question, but I'm by no means made up my mind on this one yet. But if the LRB were minded to approve the new road, the proposal, that's what we've got before us as a road, would it be competent for us to put a condition in, first of all, that we had to have a landscaping scheme presented to us, or presented to the planning service prior to any further works being done on the road? And secondly, that the applicant would need to undertake an archaeological survey of the site of the road and any proposed landscaping prior to any completion of the road being undertaken. I know that sounds a bit convoluted and complicated, but this has been on the go for some time now, convener, and at some point the applicant who's running a business will want to get on with this, and I think we would want to all get on with it, but we need to do it within the limits that were imposed upon us.
Yes. You want to make a comment about that? Or anyone? Or?
Well, I've been asked it.
Yeah.
It's a question to me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I will say, you take it in order. You raised the question of would it be competent to have a condition in relation to landscaping, and yes, there is no difference really between this application and many of the applications you deal with. It's on land. It would involve land in the applicant's ownership, so in that sense it would be competent. And I'm assuming you're thinking of landscaping in terms of the impact on the appearance of the road and its usage, and that would seem to serve a planning purpose, so in that sense it would appear to be competent. On the archaeological side, I mean, again, I can really refer you to page 323, which sets out the concerns, if I can put it that way, that are being expressed in that area. It'd be difficult to say that it wouldn't be competent, if I can put it in that way round, to try and ensure that there was an archaeological survey was carried out. So I don't think I could really say any more than that.
So it wouldn't be competent?
No, I think it potentially would be competent, but I'm also similarly conscious of the difficult circumstances we have here, where works have been carried out, which it's made very clear that the expectation that it may already have damaged archaeological remains, and the concern that any further works, which is implicit in granting consent here, would simply carry out further damage, albeit it's difficult to know how that's quantifiable at the moment because we haven't got the original survey.
Can I ask if it would be competent to defer this once again till we get an archaeological investigation into the area of the road and the proposed road, etc., and also get clarification from the clarification that the new road, I am not convinced that if this is being given permission for yard and business as well as agricultural use, if that road is completed, and is it going to be re-excavated and a full spec road put in that would stand the vehicular movements that would be expected? I'm asking if that would be competent.
I think it's always open to members to continue an application for further information. I think that's available to you. I think you would need to break it down. What I heard is that you would be asking the applicant for further information as to what further works may or may not be carried out to the road as built. You would then be looking for, the applicant, I think there would be the applicant carrying out an archaeological survey in terms of both the existing, or the road as already constructed, as may be constructed, and landscaping as well.
Yes, I would.
And sorry, Convener, I think you would then be looking for comments, and that would be in consultation with PKHT on the survey, and I think you would actually be looking for their comments overall on that as well.
Yes.
That's assuming that you're satisfied with what the landscaping has been proposed so far.
Yeah.
I've heard some reference to those.
Because I'm slightly at odds with Councillor Wilson, because if the archaeological people are frightened that landscaping would cause further disruption, we need to drill down if it would be correct to go against them and ask for landscaping. That's why it all depends on my colleagues, but I am very much thinking of a deferment, to be quite honest. But then if one wants a deferment, we can defer. And if it's competent to defer on these two matters, I think it should be deferred.
Can I just ask one question? Can that be achieved through conditions rather than deferment?
I think Mr Harrison's indicated he's competent. The question is whether you should be getting that information now to actually
Yes.
consider this application, to be able to take a decision. And Mr Harrison has said it, while it's competent, I think you have to turn your minds down to what information do you need to take a decision. I don't know if Mr Harrison has anything else to add.
Yes, I think I was trying to answer it, and she would say, is it technically competent? But I'm conscious we're in quite unusual circumstances here. And your difficulty would be if you were to make the conditions subject to information being submitted to you, and then to find that that information actually prevents, for the sake of argument, either the road being constructed in a particularly practical way or landscaping being carried out in the way that you were expecting to be carried out and presenting a limitation, then you would find yourself in a difficult position.
I don't know. I want to make a comment on your comment, but I'll try and keep it brief, Convener. I just wanted to clarify that my question about an archaeological survey would have included an assessment of any landscaping proposals that were put in as well as the road.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's what Mr Elliott is noting, that the viability of doing landscaping and not after the assessment.
Perhaps not clear enough, but my understanding of where you're heading, Convener, is to the applicant provides information what still requires to be done to the road.
Yeah.
And the well, we've got some information on landscaping, of course. I'm not sure whether more is needed. But that's purely information. It's not actually the carrying out of any more works, of course. There's no permission for that yet. But then that information, then a survey could be carried out, by the sounds of what you're asking. And now, of course, that's often to the satisfaction of PK. Well, normally what we see in a condition is to the satisfaction of Planning Authority in consultation with PKHD. So you would bring PKHD and also invite them to go slightly beyond and actually comment on if it is built, what do they think?
Yeah.
So it's maybe not, I'm trying to articulate the best I can. I'm looking at Mr Harrison here.
I'm not sure if everyone's in agreement with me, but I think
But I'm still,
I see that as the way
yes.
forward.
Well, that's assuming, you also have to be careful that that's assuming that the landscaping information you've got before you is satisfactory at the moment. Or do you need more information on that?
Just moving the same idea that we could, we have it within our remit if minded to refuse this application, and which would potentially force the applicant to go back to the original route of the site. And would it be competent to ask the Heritage Trust to comment on what the implications would be with changing the route? Is it? Because it would certainly have an implication on potential decisions that we would make.
Looking at Mr Harrison here, that's always a very difficult situation in these circumstances. But I think you're actually possibly going a wee bit beyond your remit to an extent. I understand why you would want it, but that's more an enforcement issue.
Indeed, and the application before the LRB is just that. And
of course, you're aware
recognising-
that there is the
yes,
previously consented
recognition
one.
that the planning
That makes
history
it difficult,
has that
but-
approval in it. Yes.
Mm.
So we're happy with the decision to defer?
Yeah.
Could I suggest, Convener, I mean, I know I've said it already, but we do have to be very careful in the terms of deferral here. And I've got applicant to produce further information on, firstly, I'm not sure how to describe it, the road already, what further,
Well, the road specification,
yeah,
finished specification. Is this the finished specification?
specification for the built road, yeah, for built road as as would be fully constructed.
Yes.
We may change the terminology, but I think we're being clear what we're looking for at
And
the
then
moment.
that would
Yeah.
need to be also given to anyone that's doing the archaeological investigation.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking we're then going on to, I think the road information plus the landscaping scheme be provided to, I think it would be, I'll call it development management. I think they would have a role, and PKHT. And then you're asking and this would be by the applicant, of course, copy to LRB to the committee services. And then, where was I getting to? Applicant to carry out an archaeological survey.
Yep.
Terms of which will be to the satisfaction of the planning authority in consultation with PK. And if I've got it right, and I think members, I'll come back in one matter in a minute, then it would be comment from, it needs to be development management and or any comment development management PKHT on should the further roadworks and landscaping be carried out, and their views on the impact, including the views on the impact of those works.
Reverting back to the
Well,
consented.
no, just it would be the works of actually carrying out the making up the road and the landscaping to landscape that road as constructed. It wouldn't be about putting it back, because that's more enforcement issues.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
Now, we're just looking at everyone, make sure if that covered everything.
The only addition you might wish to consider in terms of, and it may be a routine part, you're thinking about a shared agreement as to who undertakes the archaeological investigation being agreed, as it were, between all the parties. So it's sufficiently independent.
Terms and who by will be in consultation with Planning Authority and PKHD.
Yes.
Terms of theory would be broad enough, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other thing, Convener, is this is assuming that you're accepting the landscaping scheme as presented to you. Mr. Harrison, sorry, you.
No, the only issue I was raising really in relation to the landscaping scheme was the fact that we now have a consent which overlays, this is the consent for the agricultural building, which overlays part of the original landscaping scheme which has been accepted by the planning service in relation to the business change of use application, which now effectively has become redundant, although that's part of the papers you have in front of you.
Okay. Okay. Members content with that?
Yeah, we'll go happy with that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sorry if you've had to wait so long. But anyway, I think you've got a bit clarity on what we require. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay.